All right, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with Blue Rock Station, and as per normal, we're going to go ahead and start with the news of the week, and then what we'll do is we'll jump into some of the announcements, webinars that are coming up, things of that nature, and then we open it up to the floor, the folks who are joining in live here on the calls, and see what items we can deal with there. If there's anything burning a hole in anyone's psyche that we can address, and then we try and pick a topic each week. This week we're going to talk about bidirectional charging with EVs to see if that's really a thing. And I asked our friend Tony to join in, and we'll see when he joins in on that. Hopefully he'll be there for that. Okay, so getting into the news for this week, the U.S. Energy Agency, the EIA, projected recently looking at an 84% growth rate over the next 2 years for solar. This continues a trend that has really been in place since 2009, where we've seen on average year-on-year growth in the solar industry of 44% per year. Which is pretty astounding, considering that's for, about 14 years, 15 years now, 44% annual growth rate. And of course, in the world of compounding growth rate, when I just did a little exercise with that, if it continues at this rate, really within 3 or 4 years, you're going to see it pass natural gas as the largest supplier of energy, hitting 40, 50%. I think we're going to see a slowdown on that because really interconnection is a big issue and supply chain. So it's hard to imagine that 44% rate can continue for much longer. They are projecting that the percentage of the grid that's supplied through solar is going to increase from 4%, where it currently is, to about 7% by the year 2026. And that this year, actually, solar is going to overtake hydro as one of the renewable energy sources of generation. That'll put it in second place behind wind. I suspect in a year or two, we're going to see it surpass wind, because actually wind is hitting, I was going to say headwinds, but that's a bad pun. Anyway, it's having some problems due to rising costs and the like. Now, coal has been the big loser in all of this. They're projecting a 19% decline over the next 2 years in coal generation, and about a 26% decline in actual mining of coal in the US over the next 2 years. Since 2009, we've seen coal go from 45% of the mix in electrical generation down to about 18% now. While the generation from solar of new facilities is really strong, actually natural gas remains quite strong in our industry as well, in the electrical industry. The generation from natural gas as part of the grid mix is up to 42%, up from 37% in 2019. Now, most of this growth is at the expense of coal, not at the expense of the other generating fuels. EIA says that their analysis shows a lot of this growth is because natural gas prices have been unusually low in recent years. And they're projecting that that's going to increase, which is probably going to slow the growth of natural gas as a generating fuel. Greenhouse gas emissions worldwide were reduced, or actually went down for the first time globally in 2023. But they've been in decline in the US for quite a while, really since 2007. We've seen a decline in greenhouse gas emissions here in the United States. And this is, again, largely due to the retirement of coal generating facilities. The US saw a 1.9% decline in greenhouse gas emissions in 2023, despite the fact that we saw a 2.4% economic growth rate. But the EIA says that in order to meet the 2030 goals set by the Paris Climate Accord, this decline is actually going to have to triple over the coming years to about a 7% decline annually here in the US. And now the greenhouse gas emissions from electricity generation actually did decline 8% last year, but that only represents about 25% of all of the greenhouse gas emissions from emitting activities. There were continued emission increases in the industry and transportation sectors. So that ended up offsetting a very large decline in electric generating greenhouse gas. And while solar is booming nationwide, not necessarily the case for individual installation companies. Solar Insure, which is a commercial warranty company, not really sure they call themselves warranters. I'm not sure what that means. But anyway, they reported that over 100 solar companies filed for bankruptcy in 2023, which is a record. The issues that were cited for this were high interest rates. We saw the interest rates really climb, which meant that the cost of installations went up quite a lot, even midstream on some of these. Also rising permitting costs, but the big thing, the big dog in the room was California changing their policies with net metering 3.0. The passage of net metering 3.0 by the California Public Utilities Commission, they lowered compensation through net metering by over 70%, which was pretty dramatic. And as a result, installations began to plummet in that state, leading to 22% decline in the workforce in the state of California. Now, similar policies have been adopted in Indiana and North Carolina, and we're seeing other states looking at this. I think this is part of the process where the utility is fighting against distributed energy, especially at the residential scale. And they found that the legislature's kind of a tough sell, but the public utility commissions are already bought and paid for. So why not go in there and get some rules in there that cause some havoc? So I suspect we're going to see more of this in the coming years. And I know when I talk with folks, it just feels to me like the utilities are sealing their own doom. I mean, they're kind of just saying, all right, guys, we're going to make it so difficult for you to deal with us that you're going to go independent. You're just going to go to a standalone mode when that becomes economic. Now, the forecasts for community solar are looking good, according to Wood Mackenzie. They just projected about 11% year-on-year growth for the next 5 years. Now, just as a reminder, community solar is when instead of installing, say, 50 or 100 residential solar systems on individual houses, a developer will come in and will install a very large system somewhere outside of town or on a warehouse or something like that, and then sell portions of that to the individual homeowners. So it's a very economical way to do this, but it does require that the utilities participate in this because they have to allocate the portion that's being generated to a specific bill. And the utilities have proven not to be too agreeable. So in order for this to happen, basically the state legislature steps in and says, you must do this within our state. Well, currently we have only about 22 states that have favorable community solar policies, plus the District of Columbia. But there is legislation that has been proposed in Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania that look to expand community solar in those states. There are a lot of incentives within the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and also there's a new program with the EPA's, they have one called Solar for All, and these incentive programs are making it very lucrative for developers to get into community solar. So hopefully we'll see more and more pressure there, moving community solar forward as a practice. And that's the news from the solar industry for this week. So does anybody have any comments or anything they want to add to that, to the news there? Give you just a second to speak up. All right, and you feel free to interrupt me as I'm moving forward. I'm used to being interrupted. So let me announce some of these upcoming webinars. And just as a reminder, if you're new to this, I'm not going to give you the links on these. I'm just making you aware of these webinars, and you can look for them yourself. That's I'm not your secretary, I'm not your mom. So anyway, so there's on January 16th, which is today, 1 p.m. today, there's a webinar here on trends, solar trends coming up. So jump on that. This is not a webinar, it's a conference. It's 17th through the 19th, Inter-Solar North America and Energy Storage North America in San Diego. So if you're going to that, hopefully you're already in San Diego and not in the snow here in Southern Ohio. On January 17th, 7 p.m., Eastern Solar United Neighbors is putting on a webinar about how to effectively lobby legislators regarding solar. So as a homeowner, you can go and push your agenda on them. January 18th, 11 a.m. All these times are Eastern time. Interconnection issues under the new FERC guidelines. So obviously, if you're a utility, jump on in there. If you're a homeowner, you probably aren't all that interested in those kind of requirements. January 18th, 2 p.m. There's IREC is putting on one about how to work with different organizations partnering to try and take advantage or leverage some of the incentives that are out there as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act specifically. They're talking about community-based organizations, labor unions, nonprofit entities, government agencies, all of these groups. There are ways that you can work with them to try and maximize incentives and sell some systems. January 18th, 3 p.m., there's a webinar about trade and supply chain projections, some of those issues for the coming year. We can see that a lot of these webinars are coming back online. We had a kind of a dearth of them over the holidays. January 23rd, 2 p.m., Solar Edge is having a webinar about their kind of large system scale inverter that they've just released. It's a 330 kilowatt inverter, quite large, for large ground mounted systems, agrivoltaics, large commercial systems. This thing partners in or pairs in with a 1300 watt power optimizers. And they claim has a 99% efficiency. You can do a 200% DC oversizing. So that would be the inverter load ratio. So gosh, if that's true, I should have read more on this, but that means you could hook up a 660 kW array to this inverter. That's quite a amount. So anyway, worth a look especially if you do very large systems and are thinking Solar Edge might be a solution. Safety issues with battery systems on January 23rd at 2 p.m. January 30th, you can look at CEA's diversity certification, where that stands. That's another webinar coming up. February 6th, proper way to report grid outages under the new standards. So again, if you're a utility, apparently for some reason they want you to let people know when your grid goes down. So then on the 20th February, 2 p.m., there's one about recruiting and retaining veterans within the solar industry. And then, of course, my shameless plug for solarpvtraining.com. We have ongoing, web-based training as well as in-person training. Some items coming up here in the next few months. So feel free to jump on in there. I don't want to belabor that. And anyway, since I'm a terrible marketer, so at this point, anybody have anything they want to bring up for the good of the cause before we jump into our topic of the week? Just give you, let's see. Bill, are you speaking? You're on mute there.
Hey, would you skip back one slide back to the one on the veterans training? That one. Yeah, that's the one. I'm just trying to get the.
Oh, it's through
working with. We're starting to work with veterans here in Manhattan, and this might be useful. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Okay. Anybody else have anything else they want to mention, and if you do bring up, if you do come online, if you could just enable your video too, because we post these things on YouTube, so it's always better than seeing a black screen. You were fine, Bill, but I just wanted to remind folks. Okay. Okay. Okay, so the topic today is will bidirectional charging be a thing in 2024? Well, if you remember 2 weeks ago during my predictions for 2024, I said it would, so it must. So that's my whole presentation, right? That's all we need to say about that. So anyway, since I've been thinking about this, I thought I would look in and just see. It's easy to make a projection when you don't know anything about it. Then the deeper you look into, the less likely it seems. But then, of course, those people who know the most about a thing are typically wrong about that thing 99% of the time. So I'm still not changing my projection, but I'm going to hopefully I invited Tony to join in here to give me some insights if we so that we've got an informed discussion here. But I did want to just sort of remind folks what bidirectional charging is. When we're looking at more and more systems getting battery backup within, especially, and I'm really focused on residential here. So the cost of the battery systems can be pretty high. So one of the holy grails that we're looking at is to be able to use your electric vehicle and then use that as your battery backup so that in case of emergency or for demand charges or whatever, load power quality issues or time of day pricing or things of that nature, we can go ahead and use the electric vehicle as our battery backup. And then further than that, we can take it not just vehicle to home like that, or vehicle to business if we extend it that way. I can envision a day in the not too distant future when you go to a university campus, for example, all of the student parking has electric vehicle plugins, and this combined energy from the student vehicles can power the university in case of a power outage or deal with load demand shifting and the like. That's sort of the exchange saying, I'm going to give you free charging in exchange for me being able to use your capacity to deal with certain power issues. So that's something. Well, then you say, all right, that works on a college campus. Could it work on a city level? Could it work on a nationwide level? So does this distributed resource of batteries that are located in EVs become something that we can tap into for use within the grid? And that leads us into kind of vehicle to everything. So how realistic is that? I would not go out on a limb, but basically say this is going to happen someday. The question is it going to happen in 2024 or 5 years from now or 10 years from now or whatever? So that's kind of where we're at. I'm feeling like we're right on the edge of that. So let me outline some of the challenges that we're dealing with here to try and get to that stage. There has been a problem with compatibility, right? Different vehicles have different charging ports, just the physical plugging in. That's a thing. That's an issue. So you've got the Tesla port, you've got the CHAdeMO, you've got the other one. It's J something or other. Anyway, all these different plugs. How are you going to get a universal charging system when you can't even plug into the same chargers? So that's an issue. There's also the issue of anti-islanding. So all of these systems have to have some way to disconnect from the grid if the grid goes down, so that you're not backfeeding this power onto the grid and causing an issue. So that's a big deal. And if you've ever installed one of these systems that has the auto transformer or the smart switch or whatever they want to call it, then it's expensive. That adds quite a lot. I know with the Enphase system, just that that auto transformer switch, the smart switch, is a $2,500 cost. And then that doesn't even include installation or programming or all of that other stuff. There is the regulatory requirement that the charger operate with a unity power factor. Apparently that's a thing, but not a big deal. There are also demand charges. Now, this is a big deal, especially when you get into the commercial end. And demand charges are essentially when a commercial entity gets charged based on the highest volume of energy they consumed for a 15-minute period of time over the course of the billing cycle. So all of a sudden you add just one charging station, one high voltage charging station or high amperage charging station at your local gas station, and you might see your electric bill double because of demand charges. Just by putting this one, if one person charges one vehicle one time during the month, your electric bill may double just because of the way the utilities bill on this stuff. So that's a big deal. How are we going to deal with that? Some places are dealing with it by bringing in trailers of batteries and essentially like trickle charging the batteries and then bulk charging the vehicles when they pull up to that. That doesn't sound like a good long-term solution, but that's something that's happening. So that's a big deal. Isolating it from the mains, that's another issue. I don't even want to pretend to understand that, except that when I was reading through, they were saying you were going to have to install transformers into the system to isolate that. And maybe when I let Tony speak, if he's online, he can give a little more insight into that. I'll get through this list, Tony, and if you're there, I'll then recognize you. There's internal charging protocols and voltage issues and things like that. The world of automobiles have been fairly isolated, self-directed, let's just say that. They haven't worried about, if I'm a Toyota guy, I don't have to worry if my Toyota is compatible with General Motors. The only thing I have to worry about is, can I sell it to somebody? And really the only compatibility issue is how, do you all work from the same kind of gasoline or diesel or whatever? And does that little nozzle fit into your gas tank? The rest of them are fairly autonomous. Well, now you're interacting through a common protocol. And how are you going to coordinate that? We do have a lot of standards that are evolving, but these companies have to talk to each other. They have to cooperate with each other. I say that, but there's also sort of parallel developments here going on. And some people are still sticking with the proprietary solution thing. So which one's going to win out there? And they're not even compatible on what voltages they're operating under. So these charge control companies have to, work within a range. So that's an issue. So we have to make sure everybody is dealing within a common range anyway. How does this affect EV warranties? I looked online for a lot of information about that, and basically the only thing I come up with is older EVs aren't probably going to work with this stuff, and oh, by the way, it might void your warranty. That's not overly helpful. So how are we going to get through with that? And is there available capacity on the grid, nationwide and locally? If you start seeing large amounts of demand, not spread evenly over the grid, how is that going to affect people locally? How is that going to affect substations? How is that going to affect? So have these things been put in place to deal with it? And we're still even arguing about AC versus DC on the charging process. Is the inverter contained within the charging equipment itself, or is it contained within the vehicle? And there are two different lines being followed there. So these are some of the challenges. And if I were looking at this list, I would come down on it and go, not quite sure this is going to happen in 2024. But nay, that's the problem of being overly informed. You end up not seeing what's possible. You only see what the problems are. So anyway, Tony, are you online here?
Yes, sir, I am.
Hey, Tony, and why don't you let people know just a little bit about what you're doing and why I asked you to join in?
Yeah, so we've been working for the last few years. Started a technology company called czar, Carbon Zero Advanced Research. We're focusing on combining the functionality of a lot of the power electronic systems that Jay talks about: solar inverters, batteries themselves, smart grid connections, and EV chargers into, instead of multiple devices, one device, physically one device that can physically connect to solar, connect to a battery, connect to the grid, and connect to your car through an EV charging cable, and be able to route the power anywhere in that quadrant where it makes sense to push and pull from. We've spent hands down the most time on the EV charging side, specifically the bi-directional charging side. Thinking about this out loud, we have probably spent more time on the charging side than we have on the other three connections combined. A huge point of conversation is bi-directional charging. Not only will it happen, but when will it happen, right? Because you could have the right idea that's poorly timed and you die, go out of business. So timing is also everything. So I'll start with kind of my predictions. Good predictions are always based on some kind of underlying facts. So I think we'll start to see much more widespread adoption starting probably in 2025 and moving through 2026. Jay did a great job of mentioning this a couple times in his introduction, but the most critical in my mind reason for that is, first, you needed to standardize charging in the first place. And that food fight occurred last year and will occur, I think, this year between, started with Tesla was this original, hey, this is how we're going to do our plugs, this is how we're going to do vehicle communications. Then the Japanese stood up CHAdeMO, and then the rest of the world, rest of America, South Korea, and Europe did CCS, the combined charging standard. And so for a second there, you kind of had this wild world of 3 different charging standards, and that was going to be a nightmare if we're going to talk about, rolling out national charging infrastructure. Fortunately, CHAdeMO died, so then it was Tesla and CCS, and we thought that that's what we'd ride into the future with. And then at the middle end of last year, you had essentially CCS adopters jump ship, all the way at Ford, GM. There's a whole list of them that said, hey, actually, we're all going to adopt the Tesla charging standard, which was renamed NACS, the North American Charging Standard. Okay, so all that nerdy stuff out of the way, all of that to say that standards matter. And so when you're looking at a kind of a technology like this, you kind of have to think about it in maybe 3 pillars. One's the technology, like the physical, can you do a thing? And then the standards with that technology. Then there's the economics. How much, okay, you can do a thing, that's cool. How much can you do it for? And how much can you charge for it? And then the third is like adoption, right? So usually if you can figure out the technology works well and it's standardized, you can have a reasonable price, adoption goes up. So those are kind of the 3, that's kind of a little bit of the backstory on how do we build to, will bidirectional charging happen? I think it's absolutely. When will it happen? I think we needed to first figure out the standardization food fight. And then now it's about making it reliable, making it cost effective, and then that'll get into adoption. So I'll pause there, but then I can kind of maybe explain just very briefly kind of personal thoughts on how this will unfold.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Tony, because I want to kind of go back and forth with you on this. I will say that there, as you mentioned, the Tesla thing, we seem to be standardizing on the plug, which is probably the easiest thing to deal with in all of this, I imagine. Then we start to see a lot of these organizations now lining up, at least talking about the need for us to all cooperate and work together. So they're filing these memos of understanding and all of that stuff, and whether that becomes a real thing or whether it's just happy talk and they were all attending a meeting at the Department of Energy and they wanted their grant money or whatever, who knows, but we'll see how that works out. But they are talking to each other. That's a thing, and they're, as part of this, I just thought this was an interesting quote out of that memo. The nation's anticipated 30 million electric vehicles will form a national energy storage asset by 2030, an asset that becomes critical power source during regional national crisis, and important that this asset protect against cyber terrorists and blah, 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 blah. But it really does say that, okay, this is a huge potential thing, to have not only for you to use your electric vehicle to back up your home, but nationwide to have this distributed energy storage system is probably going to be critical for renewable energy, the intermittency of wind and solar to become a dominant player within, the nation's grid. Coal, natural gas, that's just stored solar energy, really, in fossil fuel form. So how do we get this distributed thing going out there? And I don't want to get too deep into this. I'll jump over them, but there's a bunch of standards that are out there. And what kind of prompted me to start looking at this is a lot of folks are announcing, hey, you know what? My system just got approved by, UL 9741. I don't know if that's a big deal, and Tony, maybe you can give insight, but I'll throw these things. I don't want to get into them, but there's not only the plug to plug in, but there's a lot of communication going on, bi-directional communication with the grid, following, how to make the waveforms and how do you deal with the grid issues there. So SAE is involved in a lot of the standardization that's going on there. They're the automotive folks. I don't even remember what SAE stands for, but anyway, so Tony, you got any insight on how that's all going?
Yeah, kind of a little bit more behind the curtain on the technical side. So when we're talking about these kind of charging standards war, the plug is what's often talked about because there's such a difference. That's the thing that you physically interact with. But far more important than just the plug itself is how the system actually works. So not to insult anyone's intelligence, but electric vehicles come with what's called an onboard charger. And that's a device that's located inside the vehicle that takes power AC, flips it to DC, and then directly charges the battery with it. That's why when you see, a lot of these kind of cheap, $500 whatever EV chargers, all they are is essentially glorified extension cords, right? They're taking AC power and they're dumping it to the onboard charger, and then the vehicle says, "Thank you very much," flips that to DC, and then charges its battery. Whenever you want to go DC charging and have it come out of the vehicle, you bypass the onboard charger and goes directly to the vehicle. So for a bunch of obvious reasons, anyone who makes an electric vehicle is very defensive over that because you're giving essentially a direct pipeline to the vehicle itself. And that's, not just warranty, but also safety concerns. So there's a digital handshake that needs to occur between the charging infrastructure and the vehicle to make sure that everything is flowing appropriately and safely. Okay, that, whether CCS protocol or NACS protocol, that is the digital handshake that has to occur prior to any electrons flowing. That's where a lot of the cost and complexity and interoperability issues come in. If you bypass the onboard charger, then being able to push, that's pretty much figured out with all fast charging. Now being able to pull, that's a kind of a little bit more of a delicate situation, and really one that is not so much a technical hurdle. There's some standards, obviously, stuff that needs to get done, and ULs and others have done a great job of that. I don't think that's like the hill to die on here. I think it's going to come down to the cost associated with it. So you can, charge an electric vehicle one way right now for, $500, sub $500. Anytime you're talking about being able to do DC and push or pull from a vehicle, you're looking at $2,000 to $4,000 for the same charger and not necessarily a faster charger. So, as someone who's kind of thinking about this technology and wanting to build something that's actually useful to humans, it's like, is that juice worth the squeeze? Is there someone out there that's going to pay 4, 5, 6 times as much for a charger, not necessarily ridiculously faster speed, just to have that capability of pulling from the electric vehicle when the auto companies allow that to happen, by the way. And so I think there's a case to be made on the commercial side. Like when we've talked to some of our commercial partners, there's usually 3 reasons folks in the commercial setting want bi-directionality. And that's peak shaving, like Jay talked about, saving thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on their energy costs because they're able to pull from their fleet of electric vehicles and not bust that 15-minute window. Okay, that's like usually the number one reason. And then there's a grab bag for 2 and 3. Some care about the vehicle-to-vehicle charging capability, so being able to like cross-level the energy in your vehicles. So one's at 10% and one's at 100. Instead of having to go out and charge or do, wait on that one asset, you can cross-level really quickly. And now you have 2 vehicles that can be dispatched to do work. And then the third is obviously kind of emergency backup. You don't have to have a whole lot of electric vehicles in your fleet to get to a megawatt hour or several megawatt hours of power, and then that's some pretty serious juice. I would say none of those 3 things are relevant, or certainly as relevant when you're talking residential. Okay, you don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars of peak demand chargers in your house. The desperate need to cross level energy if you have 2 EVs is really not that serious. And on the emergency backup side, there's far more cost-effective options like 10 kilowatt hour, even 5 kilowatt hour batteries for emergency backup for your home that don't look like 50, 60, 70, $120,000 electric vehicles. So that's kind of how we're looking at bidirectionality in general, and then use cases for the commercial side versus use cases for the residential side.
You see, I would agree with you when you talk about at the residential level, if the cost is going to be several $1,000s. Do you see that price coming down as we start seeing economies of scale? If this becomes a thing, will these bidirectional chargers get down to the $300, $400, $500 range, or is it just technically not possible given what you got to put in that unit?
It is highly unlikely. I would say that it will. I'm confident to say that it will not happen in the near term. So bidirectional charging is at least that kind of theoretical capability is a little bit more popular in Europe. So we kind of use and kind of study what's going on in Europe and kind of apply that to the United States. There's a few folks that are working on, and they actually do solar inverters. So pretty much if you make a solar inverter in the United States, you're working on bidirectional charging for the home. I don't think we'll see a single one of these systems come in under $1,500 or $2,000, at least initially, and then much higher, probably much higher, $3,000 or $4,000. So, will that change? Yeah. Will it be a drastic drop? Will we be 2024 or 5 be at $2,000 and then 2027 be at 500? No, that's not going to happen either. And again, a lot of the reasons, the cost drivers for that is you need to be able to communicate with the vehicle to bypass the onboard charger. And for my conversations with some folks at Ford and GM and a few others, at least during the time of my conversations, there was very little appetite for the onboard charger, like vehicle internal, to be able to do that power transfer. To go, the vehicle will control in and out on the bidirectional charging side. So it's looking like, and I think several folks who are kind of working on this technology is a good indicator of that. It's looking like the brains for that, the physical and digital managers for that will be off board in the chargers themselves.
Well, that sort of leads into the next question that I had for you here is we've talked about before, is it a DC charging with direct to the vehicle where all of the AC to DC is handled in the charger, or the AC extension cord going into the vehicle? Which protocol or which process are you seeing the most juice behind? Where do we seem to be going on that?
Yeah, it's not even close. It's charger, bypassing the onboard charger, going directly to the battery, and then being able to pull from the battery and push. And again, the largest driver of that, I think, is the cost and complexity associated with the auto companies not wanting to take on that non-trivial responsibility and cost increase, quite frankly, of the vehicle. So they're saying, hey, if we can make this just like a software unlock where we can use the communication protocol for someone else to pull the power, if they want their own fancy $4,000 bidirectional charger, cool. but we're not going to increase the price of the vehicle $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for every single vehicle to be physically have the hardware and able to do that. We'll unlock the software side to enable that handshake to occur. But we're not going to increase the price of our electric vehicles, which we're already hemorrhaging cash if you don't sound like Tesla. Anyway, we're not going to add more expense to put a onboard bi-directional charger on every single vehicle.
All right, but if for the charging protocol itself, don't they have the controller primarily taking the AC power and converting it to DC for the charging? Isn't that mostly done within the vehicle today?
To go from AC to DC, it is. DC to DC, which you would because then there's you do DC to DC charging is probably the best for bidirectional charging, because you're already having that direct pipe to the battery. You can pull it from it and then do something with it else, kind of downstream, versus the cost increase of having that capability live within the vehicle itself. There's also obviously limits on the bi-directional or any charging capability on the onboard charger to begin with. Usually, it's capped. It depends on the vehicle at 11 kilowatt cap on that internal bi-directional or internal onboard charger to begin with.
Well, there were a number of announcements of companies that are announcing things this year.
Sure.
And my guess is, like the first one here, Enphase.
Yep.
I sat in on their announcements, and I felt like they knew they weren't telling the truth when they were saying it out loud. They were kind of embarrassed, saying, "Oh, we're going to have this in 2023."
Yeah.
They were kind of like, "Yeah, in your dreams." So
Sure.
we'll see if that comes about. GM, it feels like they're following the Ford Lightning model here, where you just do a total proprietary thing. You create your own charging station, you create your own bi-directional. The Ford Lightning has that ability today where you can bi-directionally charge, but my understanding is their charging system costs like about $8,000 or something. It adds that much to get that functionality, and most of the folks that I've talked to don't even bother because they're saying, I don't want to spend that kind of money, which I guess reinforces what you were saying before. But GM is saying they've got their thing for their, what is it, Tundra or
Silverado.
Yeah. Oh, Silverado. That's right. Yeah. So they've got their bi-directional thing coming out. Now the one Solar Edge made a big announcement that they're coming out with their bi-directional charger, and this is a DC to DC thing.
Yeah.
Which sounds like they may have this capacity, but what I just heard you say is maybe nobody wants them to have that capacity as far as the autos are concerned. I mean, are the automobiles going to allow this to bypass their system internally?
I mean, the standards have already been written to allow that to occur. But there's only a few vehicles that actually, in a practical way, in a way that anyone on this call would care about, enables that functionality. And look, that, like, just to be blunt, the reason for that is that all these legacy auto companies are scared to death of their battery technology. They are embarking on something they have no institutional knowledge about, and they're kind of fumbling at every turn. Again, if your company's name doesn't sound like Tesla, you've had a brutal time at every single turn in electrifying your vehicles. Some worse than others. But if you're running into a bunch of issues as it is, manufacturing issues, cost overruns, battery fires, the likelihood that you'll just kind of add another serious variable to that, I think is pretty minimal. Now, because the standards are already written and theoretically approved, folks like Solar Edge and Enphase and a few others, and again, like this has happened in Europe, a few years ago. The thought is, hey, let's build in this capability so that when the auto companies can figure their life out, when they can make a reliable electric vehicle, the infrastructure will already be there to pool power, and everything will be great with the world. Again, this is a bet. The interesting thing, I kind of love to get a small sampling from the audience. The weird thing about all of this, to me, who's kind of thinking about this all the time and wanting to build something useful for real people, I really can't justify this on a residential setting. The cost of what we're, $1,500, $2,000, $3,000 for a bi-directional charger in the residential setting, especially when you're seeing the kind of the cost of normal battery stationary storage continue to drop. So I can't make sense out of it from an economics perspective. Again, because the stationary storage costs continue to drop, I can't make a justification based on even long duration outages. So forget like a few minutes or a few hours, but if you need a couple days, the far more cost effective thing to do would be to just have more stationary batteries, because you're not paying for all of the other things that are going into the vehicle. And as you degrade essentially the lifetime of your vehicle, because instead of pulling miles from your car, you're pulling kilowatt hours from your vehicle and the warranty for that. But, and this is what I would love to hear kind of from the audience a little bit, is everyone seems to want this capability. Like everyone I talk to says it. Solar companies and energy developers who are thinking about deploying solar and storage and charging on site almost universally say, hey, I'm hearing from everyone. Everybody wants this. And so do they like the idea of it? It's easy to say I would like this capability and then, get sticker shock at $3,000 and then say I don't like it that much. But just the group, kind of a small sampling on this call, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts on this are.
Yeah, I'll start it out here, and then we'll hopefully get some more feedback so people can get prepared to jump in. But I think you're right, and it's similar to when we talk to people about putting batteries in their homes, as part of the solar thing. They want that, the idea of it. When you start putting numbers to it, then they go, yeah, I don't want it that much. And then we sort of say, well, why don't we make you ready to do it in the future in case there's quite a change in the pricing structure. So my guess is, I think it's super cool. I think it should happen. I want it, but you're right. I'm not going to pay $3,000. Plus, then there's the added problem of your car's got to be here.
That's right. I mean, in the context of like a broader solar conversation, that's never made any sense to me at all. Like if you are elsewhere during your day, that's where your peak solar production is happening. So there's a mismatch of assets. Your battery is not where your generation source is. And then when you come home and you need to refill your battery is when you have low or no solar generation. So again, like all of these roads to me just kind of continue to point to a more cost-effective, potentially modular. So we're playing with, on the residential system, we're playing with kind of 5 kilowatt hour building blocks on the energy storage side, so that for a residential product, you kind of have your base need met. It can handle the spike, few minutes, an hour or two, where the vast majority of your power outages across the country occur, but then also have the capability, if you want, to add in building blocks of 5 kilowatt hours, more kind of dedicated stationary storage. Again, far more cost effective than and practical than pulling it from a really expensive EV.
Yeah, I just saw a comment pop up in the chat about if the grid is reliable, then perhaps where they would really like this is for dealing with net metering issues. And I've already seen, like, for instance, Enphase does have that ability to use your EV as a self-consumption mode kind of thing, where you're not going to charge it unless you have excess energy, so that you're not selling back. So I think there's certainly a lot of ways of doing that relatively cheaply, but that's not bi-directional charging. You're dealing with you're using your EV there. So that's a that's one thing that we're moving towards. Does anybody else have any comments they want to jump in and give the opportunity here real quick? Yeah, Pete, go ahead.
Hey, Tony.
Pete.
We corresponded briefly by email.
Yeah.
My thing is more PV on homes, even in states that don't allow net metering.
Yes.
And what I've been doing here and propose for others to do is DC direct for domestic hot water, space heating,
Yes.
and diverting to EV charging. Also DC direct.
Yes.
Of course, that would be the invention of the DC slow charger, which we don't have yet. That's the vaporware part of it. My question to you is, do you anticipate that there would be a market for that, or do you think consumers would just not go for that? Because there is the problem that the EV isn't home most of the time.
Yes.
But then one diverts to space heat because, say, it's winter in Wisconsin.
Yes.
I get home from work and it's dark, but hey, the house was heated all day by solar.
Sure.
And then in the summer we have the late sunsets, which would be effective for charging the EV after work.
Yeah.
What's the consumer reaction going to be?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I kind of shamelessly it's kind of scratches a lot of my personal biases. So on one side, kind of high level, it made no sense to us, and part of the reason that we're doing what we're doing is solar is DC, stationary batteries are DC, the battery in your car is DC, right? The battery doesn't care if your wheels are stationary. So DC, 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 as you pointed out, further extension of that into the home, there's DC capabilities. But then everything is AC coupled, right? Obviously, we know that this is kind of legacy, historic, food fight between Edison and Westinghouse and Tesla,
right.
And AC1. I do think one of the most hilarious ironies of our time is the greatest company incorporating DC technology is named Tesla. That's a little weird. Yeah. But we're actually working on right now a few. I'll just say it. We're looking at a 7 kilowatt DC bi-directional charger for residential applications, and then a 10. So kind of your lower power DC is actually something that we're working on. To my knowledge, it does not exist, at least anywhere that we can find. Again, we're able to, you can lower the cost pretty substantially if you do that. But again, if you can get a $500 7 kilowatt AC charger, would you pay $1,500 for a 7 kilowatt DC charger with the bi-directional capability? I don't know.
A good point. The idea would be that the DC to DC converter, especially with the single side coil, is relatively cheap to build. Yes. And it could possibly be a DIY project, which won't help the Caesar, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think I am all for the more tinkerers and energy pirates, the better. I think this has been an industry that has been dominated by monopoly. That I think I'm only matched in my hatred with Jay of the kind of the monopolistic tendencies of a lot of the darker kind of players in this space. So absolutely, like I think because you're talking about power and electricity and potentially high voltage, that tends to discourage some tinkerers and DIYers for obvious reasons. But yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity here, kind of because we're here at the confluence of, really for the first time in a real setting, and Jay was a pioneer of this. But from a cost-effective perspective, being able to actually generate your own energy on site, store it on site, and electrify your transportation, like now is the time, and it's a great time to be alive.
Okay, well, I'm going to recognize
aspired to that for a long time, but now we can do it.
That's right.
Okay, let me get Eric in here real quick, and then we're going to have to wrap it up because we're coming right up on the hour. So, Eric, your question or your comment?
Eric, hey, buddy.
Hey, how's it going? Hey, I was just curious. We're talking about all this converting. How much of a loss do you realize when you have to switch, from DC to AC and then AC back to DC?
It depends on the system and kind of a few other factors, but it's usually a couple percentages every time you're doing that switch, right? So again, kind of reading my mind here, another kind of motivation for us doing what we're doing is, we looked at kind of when we got started, kind of standard solar gets flipped from, photon hits magic black glass, goes from DC and flipped to AC and immediately pushed to the grid, bye-bye electron. then random electrons pulled from the grid AC, flipped to DC to store into a battery, only to get flipped back to AC to actually power something. And then random electrons pulled from the grid AC, flipped to DC, either on the onboard charger to charge the vehicle or on the EV charger to then charge the DC fast charge direct to the battery. And so you're doing this kind of nonsense AC to DC to DC to AC to AC to DC to DC to AC multiple times a day, every single day for the life of all of those individual assets, right? And so like this doesn't make any sense. But bottom line, this is silly. It's a waste of power. It's a waste of money. The cost of having all of these things siloed don't make any sense. So that's kind of why we're working on what we're working on.
Okay, well, Tony, I'm going to wrap it up here, and I thank you again, as
Yes, sir.
always, for jumping on in. We did get a couple of votes in the chat that they're willing to buy your $1,500 charger, so that's good. You've got a ready market.
We got a beachhead market here. This is great.
There you go. All right. Well, thank everybody for joining, and we'll see you guys all next Tuesday at noon. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.